Yes, you can absolutely train through pain and injury, but should you? It depends. It depends on the circumstances. And if you should, how do you go about navigating those waters? Today, we are going to start on the journey to break down and answer that exact question. Welcome back to another athletic resilience video. If you haven't been here before, my name is Kyle. I'm a physical therapist, a strength coach, and the founder of Athletic Resilience. Today, we are starting with part 1 of what is going to be a 5-part series. I decided that the second video I was going to put together on pain and navigating training through pain and injury was going to be a little bit too much of a beast, and I decided that breaking it down was going to make it a little bit easier to consume while still allowing me to kind of dive into the details, get into the weeds a little bit without it feeling overwhelming and without you having to sit through an 1.5 or 2-hour video. Today is going to be a quicker video. All we're going to do is split injuries into 2 separate categories, and then we are going to go over some definitions and some context that I think are important and necessary for you to know and understand before we break out into the rest of the series. So let's break injuries down into those 2 categories. Category 1 is the easy one. These are going to be the common sense traumatic injuries. These are the ones where you know that you tore something, that you broke something, that you dislocated something. These are the injuries where you absolutely would not want to keep training or competing through them, and they require some sort of other medical evaluation or intervention. On occasion, they can be a little bit harder to recognize, but 9 out of 10 times, you either heard or felt something pop or give way. You can physically see that there's kind of like a dip where there used to be a muscle and now there's not as much muscle there. You could actually see that a joint has been dislocated. You could see that something is broken, right? Like these are the ones where you're not gonna really have to think that hard about it, and you should immediately recognize that these warrant some sort of other medical attention. The second category are the injuries that most people are dealing with, and it's the category where people have their most questions. And 9 out of 10 times, that question is going to be, can I or can I not train through this? And if I can, what am I supposed to be doing? And if I can't, how long am I laid up? What am I supposed to be doing when I'm not training, right? Like, I need clarification and answers to that very specific question. To best break this down and answer this question, I do think that we need to take a common term or definition that's thrown around in healthcare and performance and kind of chuck it out the window and redefine it. If you're an athlete and you have been hurt at one point or another and you've gone to a doctor, whether it's an MD, a PT, a chiropractor, and they've sat you down and they've started to go over that injury, I guarantee you that either you or someone that you know has been kind of lumped underneath the heading of having an overuse injury. We are going to take that term of overuse, throw it completely out the window, and we are going to redefine it because it isn't accurate. The term that we are going to sub in is an under-preparedness injury. If you're sitting there and wondering, why the hell should I care about a definition change? All I really care about is getting an answer to my question. I totally get it, but it matters. I'm going to flip it back on you and ask you a question. If you came in to see me and I told you that you had an overuse injury, intuitively, what do you think the solution to an overuse problem is? Honestly, there's really only one option. It's do less. The term is right there, overuse, which means our only option if something is overutilized is to decrease or stop utilizing it. That means less training. That means less running. That means less competing, less lifting. That is really the only obvious answer based on defining something as being overused. Now, let's flip it around. You come in to see me and I tell you that you have an under-preparedness injury. What's the solution to an under-preparedness injury? It's right in the term. You are under-prepared, which means what do? We do a better job preparing, which means we have to train more. Now, hopefully you can see and understand that this is not just a semantics definition issue. There's a fundamental difference in how you would go about treating something that is being overutilized versus something that is under-prepared. And the reality is, if every athlete was actually prepared, like over-prepared, wildly over-prepared for what they wanted to do, either from a recreational or competitive perspective, there would be no overuse injuries. You can't overutilize a tissue or a structure that has been prepared to adequately handle the demands of what's going to be placed on it, which means all injuries that are non-traumatic from an athletic perspective are under-preparedness injuries. It means we didn't do our job during training to adequately prepare the tissues in question, whether it's muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones, to handle the stresses, loads, strains that were going to be placed on them in a competitive environment. To me, this distinction and the fact that it oftentimes is not addressed is a fundamental issue in how athletes are educated regarding their injuries. If you go see a PT, an orthopedic MD, a chiropractor, it is really common for you to hear the term, you have an overuse injury. And 9 out of 10 times, the modification is do less, run less, squat less, lift less. And that's not going to help you prepare your tissues to handle the demands that they've already stated openly, we are not ready to handle. From a common sense perspective, if someone failed their driving test, the solution there wouldn't be drive less. They're underprepared, they failed for a reason. There's no way to make sure that they are adequately prepared to pass that driver's test without allowing them or forcing them to go drive more often. It is no different in how our body functions. Our body responds to stress, strain, and load. When it's applied appropriately, our body adapts and we get better at doing things. We get stronger, we get faster, we become more resilient, we become more mobile. This is what we're training to do so that ultimately we can go express it from a competitive perspective. All an underpreparedness injury is a physical representation of a load management problem. I'd love to present this as a math equation, which I hear you, for some people that may scare you, but it's a very simple equation and I think the analogy works. If you have a tissue's capacity to tolerate load or volume on one side of the equation, in order for you to be safe and not get hurt, that tissue load and volume capacity has to equal or exceed the load and volume expectations of your training or your competition. If it's the other way, and the load and volume expectation of your training or your competition far exceeds your tissue's capacity to handle it, that is not a good scenario. That is where we end up inevitably with injuries, whether it's right there on the spot or something that builds over time. That is just a complete mismanagement from a training perspective of making sure that you're prepped to go handle what's gonna come at you from a competitive perspective. This is the reason why we can have 2 lifters running the same training block, the same cycle, and we can have one of them 5 weeks in, completely beat up with patellar tendons that are screaming from all the squatting, while you have another lifter that's cruising and is on the way to PRing at the end of the cycle, right? One of those athletes had tendons that were capable of tolerating the volume and the demands that were gonna be placed on them, and the other athlete didn't have that preparation. 9 out of 10 times, this is gonna be more of a volume-oriented problem than it is a load or intensity-oriented problem. And they kind of distinguish themselves fairly clearly in the sense that when it is a load or intensity problem, those typically end in more severe injuries, right? If we're talking back to that equation again, if your quad tendon or your patellar tendon didn't have the capacity to handle kind of a top-end high-intensity load, that's when they give way, right? Like that's when you've seen those horrific videos of people going for a 1 rep max on a squat and blowing one or both of their quad tendons. That's an extreme traumatic example of what happens when a tissue is not prepared for the load that's going to be placed on it. That's not what most people are dealing with. Most people are dealing with more of a volume intolerance in the sense that there was either a rapid spike in training volume that they weren't prepared for, or they've been kind of chronically over exceeding their tolerance limit for 1, 2, 3 months and ultimately end up beat up because of that chronic overload. Research has kind of already shown this too, in that those rapid spikes in training volume and or chronic overloaded training volume tends to be a better predictor of injury and re-injury than absolute intensity ever will. Now, something that kind of runs parallel to this concept of overuse versus underpreparedness and is common in not just healthcare, but also the performance and content spaces, right? On like YouTube, Instagram, things like that, is this idea that there are good and bad movements, good and bad positions, good and bad exercises. As in, there are things that we can physically do from a movement or exercise perspective that are either dangerous for us or like the best thing since sliced bread. I'm gonna be completely blunt here. That is not a fucking reality, guys. There are no bad or good movements. There are no bad or good positions, no bad or good exercises. There are either prepared or underprepared athletes. And if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, we've already thrown out one thing that I kind of like thought or understood to be true in the whole like overuse side of the equation, and you've told me that it's actually underpreparedness. And now you're trying to tell me at the same time that all of these movements that I've heard of that are kind of no-nos or things you shouldn't really try to do, all of that's a lie too. Like, I get it. I get that that can be a little bit of an overwhelming concept, especially if these are things that you've kind of held true for a fairly long period of time. But I just need you to conceptualize this. Nothing is off limits if you have prepared to do it, right? For every person that herniated a disc back squatting or deadlifting, there's someone that just squatted 350 or 400 pounds or pulled 650 off the floor and then went home and played with their kids that afternoon, right? For every person that ended up with an Achilles tendinopathy or a patellar tendinopathy because their running mileage or volume got a little high and beat them up, there's someone that just added 5 or 10 miles onto their weekly volume and is on their way to going and PRing their marathon, right? It's not that these movements or positions or exercises or activities are inherently good or bad, dangerous or safe. It's just, did we or did we not prepare for what we're trying to take on? If your shoulders get beat up from overhead pressing, especially if you're trying to do something behind the neck, behind the head, there's a high flexibility, mobility, and strength demand that's required of being able to do that efficiently and safely. If you want to squat, there's once again a high flexibility, mobility, and strength demand to be able to do that effectively and safely. These injuries that crop up where people go, oh fuck, I can't back squat anymore because I blew my back out when I back squatted, or my doctor told me I can't do XYZ, lunge, deadlift anymore because my knees got beat up. Those are scenarios where the issue is not with the movement, the issue is with the preparation. If you haven't done what you need to do, you haven't checked off all of the boxes and kind of met all the prerequisites that are required to do those things well, I hate to be harsh here, but like, you don't deserve to do them, right? Like, there are movements and positions that I'm incapable of taking on or getting into right now because I haven't prepared to do them. There are ones that I'm very capable of doing because I have prepared to do them, but there's always gonna be a list of things where we're giving up the opportunity to kind of like do A, B, and C because we wanna do, D, E, and F, and those are the things that we've prepped for. That's fine. That's the point of being an athlete. That's the point of training. That's the point of competition. Everything comes at a cost, right? Like, we're always trading something for something else, which means you can't just inherently be prepared for every activity. Now, granted, if you are fairly strong and fairly flexible and fairly mobile, there is a lot that you can likely take on without deleterious effects or without any real danger to you. But the less prepared you are and the less time you've spent in specific positions or doing specific movements, the more risk you bring in when you start to try to incorporate those things kind of at random and without really having done your due diligence. So again, all I want you to recognize here is there are no inherently bad or dangerous movements, positions, or exercises. It's just, is the athlete prepared or not? Yes or no. And if you aren't prepared, there should just be an expectation that if you try to take this on, there's a probability baked in that it might not end well. And you just need to be accepting of that if that's a risk you're willing to take. Okay, so quick review time. Training injuries are an under-preparedness issue, not an overuse issue. Injuries in this type of category tend to cluster around spikes in training volume or chronic training volume overload, as opposed to training load or intensity peaks on the whole. And there are no bad or unsafe or dangerous movements, positions, or exercises. There are just prepared or underprepared athletes. So I know what you're gonna say. I've asked you to take some really big, commonly held beliefs, definitions, understandings, concepts, and I've told you to just chuck them out the window. And if you bought into that and you're on the same page, you're likely sitting there and going, great, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to navigate this injury or these injuries that I'm dealing with? And that question is the reason that I'm breaking this into a 5-part series. In the next 4 parts of this series, we are going to go over the common structures and tissues that get jacked up and fall into this injury category, this underpreparedness category. And we're gonna talk about how you can differentiate which structure or structures or tissue are the ones that are injured, and how we go about rehabbing. If we're talking, rehab, I'm gonna put it in quotes because training is rehab is training. But we're gonna talk about how you can go about training either through or around those types of injuries based on the structure that is implicated. The last of those videos, so that 5th part of the 5-part series, is going to be a little bit different in the sense that in that one, we are going to talk about chronic pain, because chronic pain is a little bit of its own beast and does not present the way that other tissue-based pathology would, and deserves its own conversation and its own video. So if you have made it this far, I hope you liked the video. And if you haven't already, please give it a like, get in the comments if you have questions, subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't checked out the website yet, it is www.athleticresilience.com. If you have any interest in the consulting services that I offer for athletes, there is a quiz that you can go take on the website that will let you know right away if you are ready for athletic resilience. So be on the lookout for the next 4 parts coming in this series, and I will see you in the next one.